start. My name's Jane Taylor. I'm the Vice Chair of the Executive Council, and this is actually a really unique event for conference. We've brought together our General Secretary, Len McCluskey, a determined backer of our Labour leader, and Alex Nunns, an author who was inspired to capture Corbyn's rise to power, and with this, the renewal of our Labour Party. In his book, The Candidate, which you should all have, Alex quotes what Jeremy said on election 2017, and Labour came within a whisper of defeating the Tories. Politics isn't going back in the box like it was before. Personally speaking, I think that's great. I've seen firsthand how Jeremy and his Labour have inspired hope among the people I live and work beside. On one visit from Jeremy in 2016 to Bristol, it was brought to a standstill. People of all ages and backgrounds stood as one in the city centre just for a chance to hear about the changes that Labour promised. I'm sure you in this room all have similar experiences, and I hope you'll share them with us at the question and answer session. But for now, let's start in a very good place with a question to Alex. What inspired you to write the book?
Well, this extraordinary thing happened in 2015. I think 2015, when Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party, is an even more unusual and extraordinary development than 2017 in the general election. And so when Jeremy was elected Labour leader, I've been writing for Red Pepper magazine, a kind of small left-wing magazine, for years, and so I knew that part of the Labour left anyway and had written articles about them and so on. And suddenly this bit of the Labour left that I was really familiar with is leading the Labour Party, which everybody had thought would be completely impossible. And I wanted to know, even though I was kind of involved in it, I wanted to know how that could possibly have happened. You know, how did this amazing and extraordinary thing happen? And I could be sure that the media weren't going to tell me, and anything I read in the papers and the long articles which came out trying to explain it didn't get anywhere near the truth of what happened. So I thought, well, I should do a bit of an investigation of this and try and kind of bring it together. And the other motivation, I think, probably more important, was that on the left, in politics in general, we're quite good at being miserable about stuff, but we don't necessarily capture and dwell on the moments when we win. And it's quite easy to forget those, because in those moments when these things happen, when you suddenly get a breakthrough, suddenly, you know, things that were impossible become possible and the world seems to open up, and it's kind of intoxicating and it's motivating, and it makes you want to get out there and do stuff. Very quickly, you know, the kind of forces against us make sure that the walls close in again and it all becomes depressing again. So I think it's important to hold on to those moments of hope to get you through the bad times, and so by recording them, I hope that maybe that's helped in some way and will help into the future.
Some people like to blame Ed Miliband for the rise of Corbyn, because without changes to the leadership rules introduced under the Collins Review then, this couldn't have happened. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, it's undoubtedly right. First of all, I should thank Alex for writing the book, because it is a seminal piece of work. You know, the truth of the matter is, in many years to come, students of politics will reflect back on what happened. I've been a member of the Labour Party for 47 years, and it's the most amazing situation and period that I've experienced. This question of Corbyn, first of all, emerging as the candidate, and then, as Alex says, going on to the election result of last year. I mean, I think there's a general view that had that election lasted just a couple of more weeks, 2 more weeks, then we would have Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister now. That's certainly reflected by the situation that happened up in Scotland. We came so close, handful of votes in half a dozen seats, perhaps 10 seats, that could have swept our way, and the same right throughout. So the idea that Alec has charted this fascinated me when I first read the book. It was incredible to relive the period, and of course it was even more incredible because we played such a key role in it. When you get an opportunity to read the book, you will find that Unite is central to everything that happened. And you know, sometimes things happen for a reason, don't they? My relationship with Ed Miliband became more and more strained. We all expected Ed to win in 2015, and I desperately hoped he would. But during the course of that campaign and leading up to it, there was no doubt that Labour was still an austerity light party. I can't quite understand what austerity light is. I used to tell Ed Miliband that I don't know what he means by austerity light. You know, you cut your wrist, but perhaps not as deep as the Tories were cutting, but you still bleed to death eventually. And we were concerned that the policies that he was pursuing, of course, would damage Labour. Now, the question you ask, did he inadvertently lead to Corbynism? The practical sense of that is yes. We had the blow up over Falkirk when Miliband was persuaded by a bunch of hacks around him that this was his clause 4 moment. This was the moment when he could take on the trade unions and slap, in particular, Unite down. And we were accused quite despicably of all kinds of manoeuvring and breaking of rules. And for the first time in the history of our movement, a union was actually reported to Police Scotland. Absolutely despicable. And incidentally, for the record, I will never ever forgive Ed Miliband for reporting my union to the police. Now, the police found, incidentally, that there was nothing to answer, which is what we knew all along. But he then made this statement about wanting to change the relationship with trade unions and wanting individual members to actually opt in to the political fund as opposed to the system that existed at that time. Now, I've got to tell you this, and I don't want you to tell anybody. I actually agreed with that. At that time, our union used to affiliate 1 million members to the Labour Party, knowing full well that a significant number of our members didn't even vote Labour. And I just thought it was an uneasy position. I didn't want to do anything about it because I didn't want to be accused of trying to split the Labour Party, trying to draw money away from them. So when Ed made his wonderful, brave speech that Tony Blair talked about, I thought, fine, that will do me. I cut our affiliation in half and saved £1.5 million, which instead of giving to the Labour Party, which at that time employed Labour Party staff, that's what affiliations were done for, half of them, most of them, engaged in attacking Unite and the left within our movement. We had an extra £1.5 million to spend as we wanted within our own political arena and our own political strategy. So it led, of course, to the Collins Review. And again, Alex embraces it brilliantly in his book. I was in favour of the Collins Review. I had to explain that to comrades in the union, in particular left progressive comrades in the union, who thought that it was going to water down the influence of trade unions within the Labour Party. I never seen it that way. The Collins Review never touched, for example, on the 50% at policy conference. That's still there. But for me, it gave an opportunity. Now, I'd love to be able to say to you, I foresaw the coming of JC. But I actually didn't. But I absolutely knew that the breaking of the Electoral College, which gave this huge amount of influence to the Parliamentary Labour Party, which is the most, or was the most, right-wing Parliamentary Labour Party in living memory. I thought that was a step forward for our movement, for the progressive belief that we needed to democratise the Labour Party. So I did embrace that. I had some difficulties with the other trade unions, other general secretaries, and we talked it through, and I expressed where I was coming from. The Electoral College, a third, the Labour Party, the trade union third, we've always had one member, one vote, ever since John Smith. So moving to one member, one vote for the whole of our movement wasn't, in my opinion, a bad thing. It was something that could be an advantage to us in the future. I never thought it would come as quickly as it did, but I was delighted when it did.
Alex, sorry, even with the rule changes, it wasn't a done deal that somebody like Jeremy would get on the leadership ballot, was it?
No, well, after these, I mean, that rule change really opened the gates, and it's one of those beautiful historical ironies where, apart from Len, most of the left opposed it. People like Owen Jones and, basically the kind of the Labour left in Parliament were opposed to those rule changes. The right were pushing them. It was Miliband who did it, but there was pressure from the Blairites for elements of it. The question about is it Ed's fault? It's Len's fault, really, because if Len had spoken against it, probably would have defeated it. And without that rule change, there's no way Jeremy Corbyn could have become Labour leader, because as Len says, the important thing it did, which wasn't really commented on, there was lots of talk about registered supporters and £3 voters in Labour leadership elections, which were brought in by the same rule change. But the key thing was that it took away 33% of the vote, which was reserved for MPs. And obviously, if you've got MPs who are so right-wing as they were, and mainly still are, that's effectively a veto on a left candidate or an outsider candidate. So that was the crucial change. But even when that kind of gate was opened up, there wasn't initially going to be a left challenger. After Ed Miliband lost the general election in 2015, there was this horrible debate going on in the Labour Party, dominated by people like Tristram Hunt and Chris Leslie, saying Tristram Hunt said that Labour needed to appeal to John Lewis couples and people who aspire to shop in Waitrose, which would have been, he was the MP for Stoke-on-Trent, and it would have been a pretty brave electoral strategy for him because there's not a Waitrose in Stoke-on-Trent. But he was doing that, and then the left was kind of in disarray, the parliamentary left, and there were no volunteers to stand for leader, even if people wanted someone to stand for leader, but there were no volunteers anyway. People were badgering various politicians to stand, John McDonnell and so on, they wouldn't do it. Even some of the new ones, even though they were just new MPs and they were completely inexperienced, people were still asking them. People were saying to Clive Lewis, will you run for Labour leader? And Clive Lewis said, I don't even know where the toilets are in Parliament, I can't lead the Labour Party. And Jeremy Corbyn was about the last person anybody thought of, and there was this meeting where Byron Taylor, who was the National Officer for the Trade Union Labour Party Liaison Organisation, he was talking to John Landsman, who's now chair of Momentum, at a kind of drinks reception, and John Landsman was saying, we need a candidate, but we haven't got anybody. And Byron Taylor said, it's got to be Jeremy, and Landsman said, why Jeremy, what are you talking about? And Byron Taylor said, he's the nicest man in politics, and he hasn't got any enemies. He does seem to have gained some. But that kind of insight proved crucial, but then it still came down to this dramatic final scene, because whoever wanted to stand for Labour leader had to have 35 signed nomination papers handed into the office of the Parliamentary Labour Party in Westminster by midday on the 12th of June 2015. And they were really struggling to get the numbers, and they had this operation running where John McDonnell would stay outside this office with a clipboard, noting down MPs as they came through. And with about 5 minutes to go, he'd noted down 33 names, so they needed 2 more. There were 5 MPs in this office who said they'd nominate Jeremy Corbyn if he only needed 1 more nomination to get over the line. For some reason, there was something really terrible about being the 34th nominated, but they were all happy to be the 35th. It was kind of an absurd situation. And they started to get really desperate. Jeremy Corbyn was stood outside this office stopping passing Tory MPs saying, do you want to join Labour for 3 quid? John McDonnell was actually down on his knees pleading with these 5 MPs saying, please, for the sake of democracy, nominate Jeremy Corbyn. And then John being John, he added a threat and said, members will never forgive you if you don't. And in the end, according to John McDonnell, with 10 seconds to go, 2 of these MPs cracked, although Jeremy Corbyn says there were 118 seconds to go, but John says a better story. So with 10 seconds to go, 2 of these MPs cracked. That's how close it came to Jeremy Corbyn not being on the ballot and this whole thing not happening, because it would have been Andy Burnham, Yvette Cooper and Liz Kendall. And it was literally that close, seconds to go.
Len, there was an expectation at that time that Unite were going to support Andy Burnham.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to be able to clear this up because I've seen this being, misquoted and misinterpreted. Of course, there was only 3 candidates in the election: Liz Kendall, Yvette Cooper, and Andy Burnham. And in a sense, we were left with the best of a bad bunch. That's the truth. So the likelihood is that had it have remained there, then Unite would have supported Andy Burnham. I don't think there's any. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to work that one out. But as soon as Jeremy became involved in attempting, as Alex says, to get these 35s, the situation changed immediately. You might all recall that when the election for the leadership started, the 3 candidates, well, obviously Liz Kendall was the 4.5%, Labour, Blairite candidate.
She was the favourite, though.
She was the favourite. She ended up getting 4.5%. A bit like some of the favourite horses that I've backed. Yvette Cooper was more or less a Miliband, Ed Balls, same austerity-like candidate. And Burnham was supposed to be the kind of centre-left with an alternative, but never actually offered an alternative. And the 3 candidates, you couldn't get a paper between them. Incredibly bland campaign that the 3 of them were running. No enthusiasm whatsoever. I remember I was in Parliament at a trade union group reception for new MPs. I think it might have been June the 3rd, and Alec, you may be able to confirm that for me, that Jeremy announced, threw his hat in the ring, and Andy Burnham came in. He was with Steve Rotherham, and he came over to me and I said, Andy, what game are you playing? And he said, oh, well, you know what I'm trying to do, Len? I'm trying to appeal to the right, because he believed that the left would automatically have to support him because they didn't have another choice. And I said, that is a disastrous strategy. And I said, do you understand that Jeremy's thrown his hat in the ring today? And he didn't know. He turned to Steve Rotherham and said, is that right? And Steve said, yeah. I said, if Jeremy gets the correct number of nominations, then this changes the whole ballpark. And you can be assured that Unite will be supporting Jeremy. So yeah, that's how it unfolded.
So Alex, how important do you think Unite's nomination of Corbin was, and do you think the other trade unions followed along? Was that a freak event, or was that the consequence of something a bit deeper?
I think it was crucial. I think it was one of the most important things that happened in that leadership contest, because Jeremy Corbyn was just an outsider candidate, seen as a lot of people just wrote him off as a joke candidate. If you go back and read the stuff that Progress, the Blairite organisation and the Labour Party, was publishing, there's a great article where it starts, 3 of the candidates who got the nominations for Labour leader have a chance of becoming leader of the Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn also got nominations. That's how they kind of regarded it. There was just this extra weird joke candidate they could ignore. And obviously Jeremy immediately got some nominations from some smaller unions like ASLEF. But then when Unite nominated him on, I think, the 5th of July, it was quite early on in this contest, just after Jeremy got on the ballot, a couple of weeks, that's the signal that this person's a serious contender. Guess what? The unions for Jeremy Corbyn campaign in 2015 gave 3 things. 1 was money, 2 was votes of trade union members, and the 3rd one, which is the most important one, was legitimacy and credibility. And once Unite had nominated Jeremy Corbyn, he was a main player in the race. And then over the next few weeks, you saw the momentum building. That's when the Corbyn campaign really started to take off, when people started to think, oh, there's something going on here. It's worth me getting involved in it. It's worth me, joining the Labour Party or paying £3. It's worth me going and volunteering in phone banks because Unite's supporting Jeremy Corbyn. And then, the other big union that nominated Corbyn, Unison, happened a few weeks later. And by that stage, the momentum, can't use momentum anymore, or Progress. But by the end of that summer, the impetus had grown so much that they couldn't really resist it. So I think it was a crucial staging post on the route to Corbyn's victory. I also think there was something deeper going on. When you said, is it a freak result? I think there was something deeper going on a longer term shift in the trade union movement, which Len might be interested on this, that's happened over, you know, a decade and a half or so of the unions moving left. You know, remember the awkward squad in the early 2000s of union leaders who were more left. And I think that was kind of a reaction to Blairism and New Labour, and the fact that the Labour government wasn't delivering gains for the trade union movement. But also I think it stretches back to Margaret Thatcher and the way she kicked trade unions out of their economic role in British industry and British capitalism, and that freed the unions up to act in different ways politically. It took a long way to feed its way through, but I think eventually that came to a position where they could nominate somebody like Jeremy Corbyn for leader, which unions obviously wouldn't normally do, because they'd normally back the person who's likely to win as long as they're, you know, someone they can work with.
Great. You know, so we all know that Corbyn was then elected in a stunning victory, but things weren't all plain sailing, were they, Len? Because according to the book, you were initially sceptical about John McDonnell being Shadow Chancellor.
Oh, God.
But you soon changed your mind. Can we ask what persuaded you?
Yeah, you can. You can. Well, to be honest, I didn't know you were going to ask that question. Alec is right, of course. When Unite nominated Jeremy, the campaign got the kick it needed. And the role, incidentally, of momentum should never be underestimated. The people who engaged in that kind of campaign, social media campaign, was incredible. So much so, it did mean other unions were kind of pushed into making decisions, and I'm pleased that my friends and sister union Unison fell into line, and other unions. It then became a real possibility, because just drifting back to the Commons report for a moment, and it's captured in the book, it was the Blairites who also pushed for registered members. And again, I was the only one who supported it. They pushed for it because they believed that the middle classes and the intelligentsia could make a payment and influence the outcome. I always seen it, and I don't care if you accuse me of saying, oh yeah, but I always seen it as an opportunity for the tens of thousands who had left the Labour Party because of New Labour coming back in. And that's exactly what happened. So it's suddenly become clear that, oh my God, Jeremy could win this. The momentum was moving rapidly, the opinion polls. And I'm not going to mention names here, but I met with a number of influential left individuals, you know, thinkers, both in the media and in the trade union movement, who all by this time had concluded that Jeremy's going to win. But the worst thing that could happen would be for John McDonnell to be the Shadow Chancellor. And there was a debate about this. You know, some people were expressing the view that John's history reflected an ultra-leftism, and it would be damaging to the party if Jeremy had won it, and we were then in the process of trying to consolidate. This could destabilise it, and I was given the job on behalf of a group of people, very influential people, to speak to John McDonnell. Now, the first person I wrote to was Jeremy, and I said, look, Jeremy, I'm speaking to you on behalf of... This was on the Wednesday before the announcement on the Thursday, on the Saturday. I said, it looks as though you're going to win, fantastic, but look, there's a number of people who think that it's not the best thing to appoint John. And Jeremy, in his inimitable style, said, have you spoken to John? And I said, no. And he said, why don't you speak to John? And the following day, on the Thursday, I spoke to John. And he said to me, after about 10 minutes, he said, listen, man, the Labour Party for a generation, now 25 years virtually, has always had a problem between the leadership and the chancellorship, either shadow or the actual chancellorship. And he said, we're going to be in a situation where we're going to have to try to put forward an alternative economic strategy against the dogma of neoliberalism that has reigned in the global arena for 40 years. He said, we need to be absolutely close, and it is going to be me. And he said, you're never going to, you're not going to persuade me otherwise. And I said, fair enough, John, you make a solid case. We then had a good discussion about all kinds of other things. But 2 weeks later, John MacDonald, here in Brighton, made a speech on the Monday of the Labour Party conference, as the Shadow Chancellor does. And it's one of the best speeches I've ever heard. I think it will be a watershed moment in the history of our movement when people record it. It was brilliant. So much so I sent word through to him that I'd like to meet him. And we met about 9:30 in a pub. What's the one at the back of the Metropole? The Queen's Lodge. The Queen's Room. About 9:30 he came in and was in there, and I said, listen, John, I want to apologise. And he said, oh, Len, you don't have to apologise. I said, I absolutely did. I now realise that I was wrong. I've just heard one of the best speeches I've ever had, and I am absolutely confident and delighted that you're the man for the role, which of course in the past few years he's proved beyond doubt. So thanks for asking me that question.
So then if we could move forward to the coup by the Labour MPs in June 2016. You came out very strongly for Corbyn and had a spectacular falling out with Tom Watson over it, if we remember. Can you tell us what was going on behind the scenes at this time, and how close did we come to the Corbyn leadership failing?
Well, I think we all know that there had been this incredible movement to get rid of Jeremy by not just the right wing, but the soft left in the PLP. I mean, I'd hate to have been with them on a battlefield, the first sign of grape shot, and they were scattering all over the place, running for cover. But it was serious, and obviously there was a need to try and stop it. There was a need to try and defend the democracy of the Labour Party and to defend the views of the rank and file of the party. You know, we'd won a landslide victory. And so I did engage on behalf of all the trade unions. I spoke to all of the general secretaries, not just the left general secretaries, but all of the general secretaries, John Hannett from USDO, for example, and they gave me the task. None of them wanted a leadership challenge. And they gave me the task of trying to stop it. And so I met with Rosie Winterton, who was the chief whip, John Cryer, who was the chair of the PLP, and Tom Watson, who was my mate at the time, in order to try to see if we could head off the challenge. And we made some progress, and there was certain things back and forward. I remember being in Parliament, meeting those three, and then going across to Norman Shaw's house to where Jeremy and John and his team were, and talking to them. So it was backwards and forwards. And there was, as a negotiator, I would say that there were pieces on the table that could have been brought together for an agreement. I won't go into those details just yet. You'll have to wait for my book for that. And funnily enough, the policy conference was here in Brighton. And I reported back to all of the unions where we were at and what we were doing. Tom and Rosie and John said, well, we need another meeting. We were trying to stop Angela Eagle from declaring, who was desperate to come out and declare her candidature. She obviously felt she had a momentum behind her. I wonder where that went. And Owen Smith was speaking to me as well. So we were trying to stop that. And I said, well, look, we can meet again on the Monday, but I can't be there. I'll be down here in Brighton. I'm going down to Brighton on the Saturday, and I'll be in Brighton. But other General Secretaries, Dave Prentice, Tim Roach, John Hannett, had kind of committed to be there on the Monday. They said to me, no, we need you there. And they then said, Tom it was, who said, well, can we meet in Brighton? I think it was his dad's birthday, his 70th, if I'm not mistaken. And his dad lives here on the south coast, and he said, oh, it would be helpful. And I said, yeah, okay. And Dave Prentice was coming. John Hannett was travelling down from Manchester for a meeting on the Sunday. We were putting John up in our hotel in order to continue the discussions. And then when I was driving down here from London on the Saturday, it suddenly was announced on Sky News that Tom Watson had declared that he was pulling out of the negotiations. There was no chance. I was shocked because I would have expected Tom to have rang me and told me that. You know, he was a friend. I would have expected him to explain his position, but he never. And, you know, we haven't spoken from that day to this.
You called it sabotage, didn't you? I remember the quote.
Yeah, I did call it sabotage because that's exactly what I thought it was. Remember, I was fearful of this, this clear danger that they would take Jeremy down, and I was very angry. Not that we hadn't reached an agreement, because we had the meeting taking place here on the Sunday, we may not have reached an agreement. But the mere fact that the plug was pulled on it when it was pulled was sabotage. There's no doubt about that. There's only me and Tom know that. But it was sabotage. People have asked me, why do you think he did it? I don't know. And, you know, I suspect perhaps we might never know. But that's what happened. And of course, then there was, how do you manage that? I spoke to Angela Regal again. I spoke to Owen Smith again, who was telling me he wasn't going to resign. He promised me that, blah blah blah, and then of course went against what he said he would do. And I don't know if you want me to go on, but the next issue, and this is Unite's role once again. It's why I said in my speech before, you know, you should all be so proud at the role that you played, that we played, because of course the next thing, when Angela and Owen were suddenly declaring, was the move to stop Jeremy getting on the ballot paper. They were trying to push that he needed 35 votes again. Now, if you consider
50, they put it up.
Oh, of course, that's right, they did, because we'd increased 50. And if you consider that people like Margaret Beckett, who's been a friend of mine for a long time, disappointed in Margaret, and Frank Field had actually voted for Jeremy in the first place and then regretted it. This move for Jeremy to have to get 50 was despicable, supported incidentally by Ian McNichol, the General Secretary of the Labour Party, and the bureaucracy that ran the Labour Party machine at that time. And it was just outrageous. There's a man who's won a landslide victory, stabbed in the back by this coup that was taking place. And they were going to try and stop him getting on the ballot paper. And let me tell you this, and I don't know how much, I'm not sure whether this is in your book. If it isn't, it can be in the 3rd edition. It might be, you refresh me. The people that made certain that Jeremy was on the ballot paper was Unite. It was our own Howard Beckett that entered the legal arena, and the people that we had in the legal scene, QCs and what have you, working for Jeremy, when the Labour Party solicitors and QCs were saying, oh no, he's got to get the 50 nominations. That's the rules of the Labour Party. And it was us that went in fighting viciously to defend that legally, as well as, you know, emotionally and whatever industrial clout or financial clout we may have had. But it was us that eventually won the day. And once he was on the ballot paper, what an incredible relief that we had, you know.
Well, once he was on the ballot paper, he was going to win, wasn't he? Because, I mean, that's why they put so much energy into keeping him off the ballot. It was a completely anti-democratic exercise. And I saw somebody on TV the other day talking about the changes to the rules which might happen at the conference this year in September, at Labour conference, about the leadership rules and so on. Still rehearsing the same arguments about, well, if you haven't got the support of, you know, so many MPs in Parliament, then you shouldn't be able to lead the Labour Party and so on. And it just seems so absurd when you turn it around and say, well, if there's somebody who's obviously and demonstrably got the support of the majority of Labour Party members and the majority of affiliated members, how can it be right that they could be not allowed to stand in a leadership election? It's just completely absurd. Only because this one part of the Labour Party, the Parliamentary Labour Party, has been, you know, shaped over a couple of decades to ensure that that political strain, which has always been within the Labour Party family, is kind of excluded from Parliament, or at least marginalised in Parliament. So I think that's what was really at stake at that time, and it was a question of where power lay in the Labour Party. Was it with the membership, effectively, or was it with the Parliamentary Party, and where did the unions stand on that, because they had the constitutional power to decide one way or the other. And the result, I think, well, we saw what happened. Power shifted to the membership at that point. There was that crucial meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party. I think it's really symbolic. That happened at the very start of the coup, before all the stuff that Len was talking about with the NEC meeting and the nominations and so on. Just after the EU referendum, the Parliamentary Labour Party had a meeting in Parliament where they basically bullied Jeremy Corbyn, literally bullied, that's what people have said to me, for an hour or more. MPs standing up saying, you're not fit to lead the Labour Party, you're not fit to be Prime Minister, you're a critical threat to the future of the Labour Party. It was all just concentrated on Jeremy Corbyn's personal, you know, his person. It wasn't about, we don't agree with your politics, or can you change this policy, can we do this, can we, you know, it was nothing political about it. It was just, we're going to try and break you as a man. That was what Diane Abbott said. She said they were trying to break him as a man, to try and force him to then just resign, because they knew that that was the best way of defeating the movement. And then, from that meeting, Jeremy Corbyn left, and at the same time, a demonstration had been called in Parliament Square with 24 hours notice. And he went straight from the meeting, crossed the road, into Parliament Square, and it was just, I was there, it was this extraordinary atmosphere. He climbed on top of the Fire Brigade Union fire engine that was there, and the whole place kind of erupted. And it was really kind of emotional, and that just showed the difference. You know, there was one group of people in a closed room, behind closed doors, trying to bully someone out of it personally. And then there was a whole group of people who realised that they had a shared political project in the open air, in Parliament Square, protesting. And it just kind of exemplified the difference between the two. And if you think back to that time, the opponents of Jeremy Corbyn called themselves Saving Labour. That was their thing. And if you just think through the consequences of what would have happened if they had succeeded, I mean, I think it's obvious that the people who saved Labour are not them. The people who saved Labour are the people who turned up to that demo, Unite, who kept Jeremy Corbyn on the ballot. Because think of what would have happened if they got rid of Jeremy Corbyn then. Half the membership would have left the Labour Party in disgust. The party would have been fragmented, it would have gone into, you know, disarray. Possibly unions, possibly Unite might have been forced to disaffiliate because there had been immense pressure for that, you know, with such a massive injustice if that had just happened. And, you know, look at who would, if it was Owen Smith who replaced Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, for example, with Owen Smith, he said at the time that he was just as much of a socialist as Jeremy Corbyn. That's what he said. The other week, he voted in Parliament for the Canada trade deal, CETA, which unites against, which basically encapsulates everything that Corbynism is against. It's a neoliberal trade deal designed to attack workers' conditions. Owen Smith voted for it. This is a guy who said in 2016 he was as much of a socialist as Jeremy Corbyn. So that's what was really at stake at that time. And I think that by and it's not just about the man, it's not about Jeremy Corbyn, it's that by keeping Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party, the Labour Party was saved at that time, and then we could go forward to the general election.
And just to add a couple of anecdotes, during that election, I remember up in Liverpool, in my home city, Owen Smith had arrived in Liverpool with a free ice cream van. Great idea, free ice cream van.
Didn't play the red flag.
And no, it didn't. And there was 100 people there. 50 of them got their free ice cream and left. It's true. This is a true story. And literally a few days later, Corbin was in Liverpool, and 10,000 people came to St George's Plaza. You would think Owen would have kind of figured out that his chances were a little dodgy.
Can we move forward now to the 2017 election? Would Labour had an absolutely remarkable result, or did it only seem so because the media was so certain that it was going to be a catastrophe?
I mean, you get this a lot because Labour people were so happy at the result of the general election, and Tories are still in government, you know, Labour did lose the election. You often get people saying, oh, well, you know, you lost against the worst government in history, all of these things, Corbyn's useless, etc. But if you just look at the result, if you look back to 2015, for example, the Fabian Society, you know, not kind of left-wing organisations, are writing reports called A Mountain to Climb, because that's how bad the 2015 election result was in terms of what Labour would have to do to get back into government. So the expectation that Labour could just walk the election, you know, with another leader is just nonsense. Labour was going to lose the 2017 election. It was remarkable how close it came to winning, but it would have, under normal circumstances, definitely lost that election. But if you look at the result that Labour got, it was the biggest increase in vote share of any party in any general election since 1945. Vote share went up by 9.5 points. Jeremy Corbyn became the only leader other than Tony Blair to break the 40% barrier since 1970. 12.9 million people voted for the Labour Party. Apart from in 1997, Labour hadn't won so many votes since 1966, and it was the second highest number of votes that Labour ever won in England, and I think that goes back to 1951. So Labour won more English votes in 2017 than in the 1997 Blair landslide. And when you consider that Blair's whole thing was that he could appeal to Middle England, that just strikes me as something completely remarkable that's underplayed. And obviously the difference is that we've lost Scotland. You know, can you imagine if that hadn't happened, how much of a difference that would make? If you look into the stats, some of the features of the general election were remarkable. Labour won 60% of the vote amongst under 30s. In 2015, it won 36% of the vote amongst under 30s, which was considered a good result. It was better than the Tories. 36% to 60% in 2 years is something, you know, completely astronomical. And I think, amazingly, 38% of the voters that Labour gained in 2017, which amounts to 2 million people, were previous non-voters. So these are people, this was the biggest vote gain that Labour got, more than it got from any other party, was people who hadn't voted previously in 2015. 2 million people. And that's really because the Labour Party consciously went out and tried to win over people who are normally just ignored by political parties. 71% of the people that Labour gained thought the establishment had let them down, which is much higher than the general population, so that tells you that what was going on was this, and Labour managed to tap into this anti-establishment sentiment, which is about, really effectively. And I think probably the key thing, I mean, Len says this in the book, there's a quote from Len towards the end of the book, where he talks about 1983 and breaking the spell of 1983. In 1983, Michael Foot went to the electorate on a left-wing manifesto and got crushed. And that's just basically been political wisdom ever since, that if you do that, that's the result. If you try and have an election with a left-wing programme, or at least just a left programme, you know, we're not talking about anything particularly radical in the 2017 manifesto, it was just solid left Labour Social Democratic manifesto. But that's supposed to end in electoral disaster. But that spell, I think, was broken by what happened in 2017, because Labour shot up to 40% of the vote. It won 5 million new voters. Overall, the vote went up by 3.6 million, I think, but 5 million of those hadn't voted for Labour in 2015. So you can win 5 million new people with a platform which was essentially Jeremy Corbyn's 2015 leadership programme adapted with some kind of modifications on Trident and other issues. But it was, you know, big policies like National Education Service, scrapping student tuition fees, national investment banks, all of these things were written by Jeremy Corbyn's policy advisor, Andrew Fisher, for his 2015 campaign, when he was just writing these policy documents in his own time for that campaign. And they were just carried forward, developed a bit, but put into the 2017 manifesto. and let into the manifesto by the right, because, as Len says in the book, the right felt it was going to be another suicide note, so they're quite happy for the left to have its way with the manifesto. And in the end, it turned out to be a huge success, and it really, everybody remembers when the manifesto was leaked, you know, how much that transformed the general election, where you had this hostile act. It was leaked by somebody in Kezia Dugdale's office in Scotland as a way to try and get the manifesto watered down in the Clause 5 meeting of the Labour Party, which was going to finalise the manifesto, I think, the next day. The press reacted exactly as you'd expect. Return to the 1970s, nationalisation, suicide note, all of this stuff. And then a poll came out where all of these policies, which have been political taboos, you know, completely off the radar, like taxing the rich a little bit more, nationalisation, all of these things, they have massive support, 60–70% support for all these policies amongst the general public. And in the end, you know, because of that hostile act, the Labour Party probably ended up positioned further to the left than it would have otherwise been, and it turned out to be incredibly popular. So that's another one of those historical ironies where one of the things that Jeremy Corbyn's benefited from is that his opponents are relentlessly rubbish. And they keep doing this, and it keeps working out for the left.
Len, you were quite pessimistic initially, your assessment about how the election would go.
Not so much pessimistic. I mean, I think when you're engaged in real politics, you've got to try to assess what's happening. The opinion polls were demonstrating that we were going to get wiped out, and as Alex has said, the right wing in the party, in the movement, the establishment, were all preparing to pick at the bones, and so it was a question really of trying to be prepared if the opinion polls were right, and it was incredible. I mean, those statistics, those figures that Alex has just talked to you about, they're unbelievable. If you sit down and you read them, it is extraordinary what happened. And it was beginning to reflect out on the ground. It was beginning to, people were feeding back. Thousands of people lining up in the rain, waiting to listen to a politician. Never been done before, I can't remember, in my lifetime. And so people there, and there were only a few people within Corbyn's top echelon who believed that something was happening out there and Jeremy's going to win. I wasn't therefore so much pessimistic. I was trying to prepare for the worst, hope that we would hang on and the left project could still be intact. But prepare, I was asked by, again, without naming names, senior people in Corbyn's team to prepare for June the 9th and for what we might need to do in order to protect any disaster and move to a period of time that could allow us to regroup and prepare for the election of a new leader if Jeremy was going to step down. So it wasn't so much pessimism, it was a question of realism, dictated by the opinion polls, which of course, as each day went by, began to alter. And you know, all of that, those figures, don't forget that during this campaign, during this relatively short campaign, there were 2 acts of terrorism on London, at London Bridge, and of course in Manchester, which again everybody thought would work against Jeremy. The momentum of the Labour campaign was stopped and then started, and then the momentum was stopped again and started, and against all of that, against the issue of defence and security, which people thought was an Achilles heel for Corbyn. Despite that, these figures still happened the way they did, and I reflect back on what would have happened had the campaign been smooth. Did those 2 events make a difference? What would have happened if we hadn't have had a coup by the PLP? You know, Alec reflected the PLP meeting where they moved to vote in no confidence, and it was Margaret Hodge, right, a London MP, who moved the vote in no confidence because everybody blamed Jeremy for the referendum result. The fact that nobody ever challenged Alan Johnson, who was in charge of the Labour campaign for the referendum, I'm not saying he should have been challenged, but nobody ever raised it with him. And the fact that nobody then pointed out to Margaret Hodge that she was in her constituency in London, only 3 constituencies in London voted Leave. All of the others, massive amount of others, voted Remain. She was in one of those Leave constituencies, voted. Nobody challenged her about that. The hypocrisy of these people is unbelievable, and there's no doubt that had there have been an element of unity, then well, I think we'd have been in power by now.
Well, I've got one last question for both of you. So we've had this brilliant surprise election result. So Corbyn's position in the party is now secure. Can the Corbin movement be strong and stable?
I think the Corbyn movement has always been, it's an alliance. And I think it's quite interesting when you look at how if you track, one of the things I do in the book is I trace the origins of the Corbyn movement that came together in 2015, and there's 3 kind of tributaries. There's the Labour Party membership, which, contrary to perceptions, actually embraced Corbyn as well. It's not like the Labour Party was done over by outsiders, like is sometimes pretended. Corbyn was ahead amongst Labour Party, existing pre-2015 Labour Party members, almost immediately, or a couple of weeks into the race. And the second one is the trade union movement, we talked about, and the third one is the kind of broad left, the non-party left, which flooded into the Labour Party. And you can see that, that they were all kind of a reaction to the global economic crash in 2008. Essentially, that's where the impetus comes from for all of this, where the energy comes from. It's the fact that the existing economic orthodoxy fell over and was just completely incapable of picking itself up off the floor. So, and it still is, and that's why there's still vibrancy and strength in that movement. But it's still an alliance between different groups, and you see that coming up quite often. You see it in the difference between, you know, some members of the Corbyn movement are trade unionists and socialists who are kind of steeped in the Labour movement, have been brought up in the Labour movement. Others are less well connected or less collectivised, if you like. They're more kind of loosely networked progressives who perhaps do their politics online and so on. There's a slight distinction between people who are economically left-wing, people who are kind of socially left-wing, if you like, on social issues. And the key to the Corbyn project is that these people have to find a way of working together. And I think it's trial and error, and I think it's been going pretty well, really. I think you would have expected it to have bigger splits than it has over the past few years. It thrives on adversity, and I think one of the crucial things is that there's plenty of it. So that's kind of bound that movement together. And one of the things that actually worried me after the 2017 general election was there was like a month or two when Labour's opponents weren't calling the Corbyn movement all cultists and mad and crazy people and bubble people and all the things they accuse us of. And that actually worried me because I thought, you know, something's going wrong here if they're not attacking us. The Labour Party does better when there is that adversity to fuel that energy in that movement. But I think it's about keeping that balance between those different components of the movement going forwards. And this will apply in government as well, because getting into government's the easy bit. Then there's going to be an almighty attack on a Labour government from the establishment and from you know, big business and so on, which is going to be an onslaught, and it's going to need even bigger mobilisations than we've seen so far to confront that. And really the key to that is this balance between people both benefiting from this kind of alliance. So, for example, the trade union movement can harness that kind of Corbyn-generated energy to unionise workers in precarious industries and so on. That's going to benefit the trade union movement. If those loosely networked progressives, if you like, can learn the strength and the advantages of having collectivity and join unions, then that's going to benefit their struggles as well. And it's about trying to fuse those things together more solidly, I think.
Yeah, I'd just go back to the quote that Alec made right at the beginning of this discussion when Corbyn said politics isn't going back into the box where it came from. I think that's right. I think there's been a dramatic sea change within politics, within the Labour Party, and I think that the ideals that we have come back to will stand the test of time. I think the alliance that Alex talked about is important, and of course, you know, there'll be disagreements along the way with various elements in that alliance, but nothing, in my view, that will bring about a fissure that would damage the whole project. So, yeah, I see good times ahead. I've never been as excited as I am today in my political life, not for a long, long time anyway. Takes me back to the days of my youth when you could get excited and passionate about things, and this is the same. Will we have to fight? Of course. The truth of the matter is that the mess that the government are making at Brexit negotiations at the moment, and the deep, deep splits that they are having, we would have well had a leadership challenge in the Tory party and possibly another general election. We'd have well had it had Ed Miliband or Gordon Brown or Tony Blair been leaders of the Labour Party, because the establishment would have figured out, or Yvette Cooper or certainly Liz Kendall, the establishment would have figured out that, look, if we lose, no big deal, because they're not going to challenge power and wealth. With Corbyn, they are scared stiff because they fear, which is why you've got all of these MPs who, certainly on the Remain side of the Tory party, who speak very passionately about things, but privately are making it clear to people that, oh no, we'll never vote to bring the government down, because by doing that, we put forward the possibility of a Corbyn government. They're scared stiff, and rightly so, because Corbyn will make a huge difference, and I see us going you know, from strength to strength, so long as we can remain united. Whatever differences we have can be worked out, but we must keep united and on a clear course.
Thank you. Have we got any time for questions?
Of course we have.
Great. If you put your hand up if you'd like to speak.
Oh my God.
Can I just say one more?
Not this many questions.
Yeah, not this many. Right.
Hi Len, in the panel. What's been said about Scotland and the Labour Party losing Scotland? Do you think, and hopefully we've turned the corner there and we're coming back again from the last result, but do you think that Jeremy has learned lessons as far as the Labour Party is concerned in Scotland, particularly about devolution, and go back to 2014 and when the second question was in put on the ballot paper and leading to the uprise of the SNP?
Well, I mean, I suppose we should take these questions three at a time, but let's answer Scotland because it was so critical. And by the way, we've been telling the Labour Party in Scotland for way over a decade, going back to 2007 and earlier, that they were losing the Scottish working class vote. The SNP were continually being seen as a more radical party. The SNP were winning seats in the East End of Glasgow in 2007. They won Holyrood in 2011 when there were no political party. The kind of system is such that it's designed so no one political party can control the whole of Holyrood. Well, in 2007, the SNP blew that out, and still Scottish Labour refused to listen to what we were saying. The attitude of their leadership was despicable. Pat and I tried to get them to accept two questions on the ballot paper for independence or Devo Max, and we were dismissed out of hand on the basis that they would put the independents and the SNP to the sword once and for all. Now, whilst they won that, the momentum in 2014 took us into 2015, and the tsunami that happened in Scotland, 59 seats, of which 56 of them went to the SNP. One Tory, one Labour. Can I call them Labour? Yeah, I suppose I can. And one Liberal. And so Scotland is key, and I do believe that Labour have learned. I think there's a lot more debate and discussion needs to take place about Scotland, and certainly we supported the new leader in Scotland who has embraced Corbynism. I think there's indications of a shift, but it's still difficult. Just very quickly, I seen an opinion poll just recently of Unite members, I think it was, Pat, who were asked specific radical questions. Do you agree with this? Unite members who voted Labour agreed with it 60-odd%. Unite members who voted SNP agreed with it 70-odd%. So there is still a radical belief in our SNP members. What that tells me, though, I was encouraged by it, because it does mean that Labour and Corbyn can bring back that radical edge that is historically part of Scotland. And in doing so, I think there's fertile ground to pull people back. Scotland's crucial, including the determination of how it operates its own devolution and its own party. But I think it's going to be crucial for Corbyn. I know that he and his team are looking very closely at how they respond to that. Jeremy's been up there quite a few times, Pat, so yeah.
I think, David, there's any sisters that want to speak? Can we hear you?
What? Just shout, Dave. We can hear you.
Thanks very much, Chair. My name is Dave Allen. I'm Chair of an organisation called Disability Labour and Vice Chair of the United Disabled Members Committee. A couple of points. You didn't refer to what I would regard as another seminal moment when Harriet Harman, the acting leader of the Labour Party, got the parliamentary party to abstain on the Tory Work and Welfare Reform Bill, which I think was a massive boost for Jeremy. And secondly, what do we do about the Parliamentary Labour Party and Labour in local government, which are the real bastions of the right wing? Do we go for mandatory reselection? Do we go for a maximum of 2 terms for a Labour MP and a Labour councillor? Thank you.
Sister got the microphone. I'll take that sister over there afterwards. Thank you.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So just to refer to this brother's point, which is if we do get a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour government, what's to stop half the PLP crossing the floor? Is there a mechanism to stop that? Because it would cost us our majority. Is there a way that instead of calling another general election, we could just deselect them then and put new ones in, or is there a mechanism to just stop it happening, basically? Because I think they would do that. I don't trust the PLP. I think that, especially over something like Brexit, if we get elected, they will cross the floor and they will cost the Labour government. It'll be like the whole SDP betrayal of '83. So I just want to know if there's any mechanisms to prevent that.
In terms of the coalition going forward,
Sorry, give us your name.
Jenny Patient.
Jenny.
In terms of the coalition going forward, what's the role of environmental thinking in that? I think Labour has taken a kind of leapfrog of on climate and energy, and how does both the Green Progressive Looser network fit in with that, and how does Unite fit in with that?
Yeah, take those.
Feel free to come in whenever you want, especially on the difficult ones. Well, yeah, actually, Dave, you're 100% correct. It's in Alex's book, the Harriet Harman, Let's Abstain on the welfare code. Absolutely disgraceful.
I think she must have been an agent for the Corbyn campaign.
Yes, good old Harriet. The truth is, of course, it was unbelievable. And Andy Burnham was now trying to desperately roll back and say, well, he was only trying to hold the unity of the party together. It was the biggest mistake he ever made. So I agree with you on that. In terms of mandatory reselection, well, as you know, it is our Labour Party, it is our Unite policy to support mandatory reselection, and it's not something I personally agree with, but I lost that debate 2 years ago at our policy conference, and so I'm not sure when that will emerge. There's all kinds of, the political scene at the moment is so fluid and fast moving. For example, we haven't mentioned the boundary changes that one hand I'm being told are not going to happen, then I'm being told yes, they definitely will happen. It might cost Labour up to 30 seats if it did happen. But one thing's for certain, boundary changes would bring in a whole, a huge swathe of reselection processes. Call it mandatory reselection if you like, but it will embrace the whole scene. And the point you make, Dave, actually comes to Neelam's point, and it's a really, really good point. How can you trust, if Labour got into power, if there was an election next year or within the next 2 years, and Labour and Corbin got into 10 Downing Street, how could you trust a group of Labour MPs? I don't have a clever answer for that. What I can tell you is that that is being seriously looked at. The last thing you want to do is gain power only for, you know, 10, 15, 20, 30 Labour MPs to cross the floor, not necessarily to join the Tories, but to create this new centre-right party that they talk about. It's why accountability in the selection process is so important at the moment, and be interesting to see what comes out of the democracy review. And just before I pass it over to Alex, dealing with Jenny's point, obviously those comrades who support the green and climate change movement, they should undoubtedly be joining the Labour Party. They should undoubtedly be embracing Corbyn. He is committed to a great extent. Now, of course, Unite has competing forces within our union. We're a trade union. But there are very strong roles that we can play as well. In fact, I've just appointed Jim Mowat as our national climate change officer to try and link together the different groups that are. But one thing is clear: comrades, decent progressive people in the green movement should join the Labour Party.
I agree with what Dave said about Harriet Harman as well, and the importance of that vote. It was there was this extraordinary 3 days in the 2015 leadership campaign, 3 or 4 days, when lots of things happened all at once, and one of them was that vote on the welfare bill where the Labour Party abstained. Jeremy Corbyn became the only candidate for leader to vote against it. The others abstained. To be fair to Andy Burnham, he didn't want to abstain, and neither did Yvette Cooper. Liz Kendall, I think, probably wanted to support the benefit cuts. But in Shadow Cabinet, Yvette Cooper and Andy Burnham argued against it, but Harriet Harman was determined. She said the electorate have told us that, you know, they want tougher action on benefit claimants, and we're going to... That's what she went on Sunday Politics instead on the BBC.
Good old Harriet.
And obviously there's nothing that could have boosted the Corbyn campaign more than her doing that, because then it was kind of like, well, that's the old politics. We need something different. That's what because most Labour Party members are in the Labour Party because they want to defend those people that were being attacked by the Tories. Even Ian Duncan-Smith ended up resigning over these. Said these changes went too far, and when he resigned, he said something which was basically, he paraphrased Corbyn's austerity is a political choice, not an economic necessity. He said something like, we look like we're doing this for ideological reasons, not because it's in the interest of the country, or something like that. Quite remarkable, and it wouldn't have happened, I don't think, if Corbyn hadn't completely shifted the debate on welfare, even before the general election. So yeah, I think that was a crucial moment. On the question, 2 questions which were basically linked about what to do about the PLP, I mean, Unite supported mandatory reselection, has been said last year. I can understand why elements in the leadership might be reluctant about this, because if you say to all MPs, well, you're going to face reselection and you're likely to lose your job, then there's no incentive for them to stick with it now. You might see the formation of a new party immediately and so on. So it's a kind of difficult political balance to tread, I think. But the thing that gets me is the second question about what to do if you're in government, and for example, you haven't got a huge majority, you've got maybe like 10-12 majority or something like that, and you bring forward scrapping tuition fees, which you've got elected on, loads of students have voted for you on that. Chris Leslie's not going to vote for that. Those people are not going to vote for that. They're going to stop the Labour government doing what his manifesto said, if they can. So that is a serious problem, and I think the biggest argument for mandatory reselection for me is not necessarily reshaping the Parliamentary Labour Party at the next election, which I think you can do a bit of, but it's not going to give a left majority in the Parliamentary Party. It's just not going to happen. It's trying to introduce that accountability, where they think, if I do this, are there going to be consequences? And maybe there are other ways of doing it. I mean, there's one, there are various proposals that are going to go forward to conference this year. There's mandatory reselection, there's the idea of changing how some of the branches nominate people for trigger ballots and so on. I think Momentum have published a proposal where it's not mandatory reselection, but the incumbent MP has to get 2/3 of his local membership, or her local membership, and local affiliate branches if they're going to not have a selection contest, which means that, that seems like quite sensible really, because then it means that any MP who can get 2/3 is going to get reselected anyway, so it's not really a problem. But any who are in trouble, there's still a mechanism there. So, but I do think that the main reason for wanting to do something like that is that problem of what a Labour government does if it's not got a big majority and it's got a PLP, which we know is just not, well, there's just a section of it which is just opposed to Corbyn's politics, as we saw with that Canada trade deal vote where 14 of them voted for it, which is just, extraordinary. And on the environmental thing, I think that goes back to what I said about the tensions in the movement, and I think that it's a genuine thing because trade unions have the interest of their members to represent. Obviously, the environmental movement was a big part of the Corbyn constituency. Climate change activists and so on flowed into the Labour Party, and it's one of those things that's going to have to work its way through, and there's going to have to be an accommodation somewhere. As for the idea of a progressive alliance with the Green Party, well, I don't know why really the Labour Party stands against Caroline Lucas in Brighton. I can't see the point of that. There are other places, Bristol and Norwich and so on, where the Labour Party could benefit from Green support. So I'm not generally in favour of a progressive alliance, but perhaps an accommodation could happen.